Today's event, and thank you so much for coming today, is hosted by the Kutztown English Club as part of a nationwide celebration of the right to read that is Banned Books Week. Promoted by the American Libraries Association and the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, Banned Books Week started in 1982 as a response to an increasing number of challenged and banned books in schools and libraries. However, as we know, there is a longer history of labeling works of art and literature as obscene and banning their sale, possession, or the teaching of them in schools. Under the guise of protecting society from dangerous ideas, some of the world's greatest teachers and writers have been forcibly silenced through imprisonment, execution, book burnings, and censorship. Today's reading is meant to challenge the notion that we can or should dictate what others read. Ideas are indeed dangerous, but as Oscar Wilde has said, an idea that is not dangerous is unworthy of being called an idea at all. Today, I'd like to begin with a reading from Oscar Wilde's letter from prison called De Profundis. In case you're unfamiliar with Oscar Wilde, he's an Irish wit, an author of the highly popular society comedies, including the hilarious drama of misappropriated identities called The Importance of Being Earnest, and the Gothic novel The Picture of Dorian Gray, which tells the story of a man whose portrait in the attic ages while he remains youthful. Wilde was a married man living in London in the 1890s and also had a romantic relationship with the young Lord Alfred Douglas, whose father, the Marquess of Queensberry, was scandalized by his son's relationship. The Marquess threatened Wilde, and Wilde took him to court. But this would really prove disastrous, since the trial exposed Wilde as a homosexual, an identity that was not recognized at the time, nor even named. In fact, it was referred to during the trial as the love that dares not speak its name, in reference to a line of poetry written by Douglas. Wilde was sentenced to prison for his relationship with Douglas and other men, but also at least partly as a result of his own writings. Wilde's stories frequently made veiled reference to male relationships, and when he was questioned about these references, when he was on trial, he defended, "There's no such thing as a moral or immoral book. Books are well written or badly written. That is all." Wilde spent 2 years in jail for this charge of gross indecency, and while in prison, he wrote a lengthy letter to his former lover. This letter is called De Profundis, but nearly didn't make it out of jail, and itself has gone through many phases of censorship, with specific references altered and passages removed, and Douglas even sued at one point to keep his name out of it. Later, Wilde's writings, among many other authors, were banned under the Comstock Act and couldn't be sent via post for fear that they would spread obscene ideas to the populace. But this letter is widely considered one of the most passionate of the English language. I'm going to read one of the most famous passages where Wilde explains his own view of the downfall his own downfall as an artist. And I'm reading from a collection that I highly recommend, edited by Nicholas Frankel, called The Annotated Prison Writings of Oscar Wilde. It's fantastic. So, I was a man who stood in symbolic relations to the art and culture of my age. I had realized this for myself at the very dawn of my manhood and had forced my age to realize it afterwards. Few men hold such a position in their own lifetime and have it so acknowledged. It is usually discerned, if discerned at all, by the historian or the critic, long after both the man and his age have passed away. With me, it was different. I felt it myself and made others feel it. Byron was a symbolic figure, but his relations to the passion of his age and its weariness of passion. Mine were to something more noble, more permanent, of more vital issue, of larger scope. The gods have given me almost anything. I had genius, a distinguished name, high social position, brilliancy, intellectual daring. I made art a philosophy, and philosophy an art. I altered the minds of men and the colors of things. There was nothing I said or did that did not make people wonder, I took the drama, the most objective form known to art, and made it a personal mode of expression as the lyric or the sonnet. At the same time, I had widened its range and enriched its characterization: drama, novel, poem in rhyme, poem in prose, subtle or fantastic dialogue. Whatever I touched, I made beautiful in a new mode of beauty. To truth itself, I gave what is false no less than what is true as its rightful province. And I showed the false and the true are merely forms of intellectual existence. I treated art as the supreme reality and life as a mere mode of fiction. I awoke the imagination of my century so that it created myth and legend around me. I summed up all systems in a phrase and all existence in an epigram. Along with these things, I had things that were different. I let myself be lured into long spells of senseless and sensual ease. I amused myself with being a flaneur, a dandy, a man of fashion. I surrounded myself with smaller natures and the meaner minds. I became a spendthrift of my own genius, and to waste an eternal youth that gave me a curious joy. Tired of being on the heights, I deliberately went into the depths in search of new sensations. What the paradox was to me in new sphere of thought, perversity became to me in the sphere of passion. Desire at the end was a malady or a madness or both. I grew careless of the lives of others. I took pleasure where it pleased me and passed on. I forgot every little action of the common day makes or unmakes character, and that therefore what one has done in one's secret chamber one day to cry aloud on the housetop, I ceased to be lord over myself. I was no longer captain of my soul, and I did not know it. I allowed you to dominate me, and your father to frighten me. I ended in a horrible disgrace. There's only one thing for me now: absolute humility. Just as there is only one thing for you: absolute humility also. You had better come down into the dust and learn it beside me. I have lain in prison for nearly 2 years. Out of my nature has come wild despair and abandonment to grief that was piteous even to look at, terrible and impotent rage, bitterness and scorn, anguish that wept aloud, misery that could find no voice, sorrow that was dumb. I have passed through every possible mood of suffering. Better than Wordsworth himself, I know what Wordsworth meant when he said, "Suffering is permanent, obscure, and dark, and has the nature of infinity." But while there were times when I rejoiced in the idea that my sufferings were to be endless, I could not bear them without meaning. Now I found hidden away in my nature something that tells me that nothing in the whole world is meaningless, and suffering least of all, that something hidden away in my nature, like a treasure in the field, is humility. It is the last thing left in me, and the best, the ultimate discovery at which I have arrived, the starting point for a fresh development. It has come to me right out of myself, so that I know it has come at the proper time. It could not have come before nor later. Had anyone told me of it, I would have rejected it. Had it been brought to me, I would have refused it. As I found it, I want to keep it. I must do so. It is the one thing that has in it elements of life, a new life, a vida nueva for me. Of all things, it is the strangest. One cannot give it away, and another may not give it to one. One cannot acquire it except by surrendering everything one has. It is only when one has lost all things that one knows one possesses it. Now that I realize that it is in me, I quite clearly see what I have got to do, what, in fact, I must do. And when I use such a phrase as that, I need not tell you that I am alluding to any external sanction or command. I admit none. I am far more of an individualist than I ever was. Nothing seems to me of the smallest value except what one gets out of oneself. My nature is seeking a fresh mode of self-realization. That is all I am concerned with. The first thing that I have got to do is to free myself from any possible bitterness of feeling against you. I am completely penniless and absolutely homeless. Yet there are things in the world worse than that. And I'll close it there. There's a lot more to that letter, obviously, but Well, next up, we have, I believe, Haley Johnson, junior English major. What are you going to start with today, Haley?
Hello. I'm going to start with The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, and then I actually picked two selections. So then after that, I will be reading from All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. So let me pull up. And so this first selection from The Kite Runner comes from chapter 2. I do not have page numbers because it's a PDF, but it's in chapter 2. Okay. Ali's face and his walk frightened some of the younger children in the neighborhood, but the real trouble was with the older kids. They chased him on the street and mocked him when he hobbled by. Some had taken to calling him Babuli, or Boogeyman. Hey, Babuli, who did you eat today? They barked to a chorus of laughter. Who did you eat, you flat-nosed Babuli? They called him flat-nosed because of Ali and Hassan's characteristic Hazara-Mongoloid features. For years, that was all I knew about the Hazaras, that they were Mughal descendants and that they looked a little like Chinese people. School textbooks barely mentioned them and referred to their ancestry only in passing. Then one day I was in Baba's study, looking through his stuff, when I found one of my mother's old textbooks. It was written by an Iranian named Karami. I blew the dust off it, sneaked it into bed with me that night, and was stunned to find an entire chapter on Hazara history. An entire chapter dedicated to Hassan's people. In it, I read that my people, the Pashtuns, had persecuted and oppressed the Hazaras. It was said the Hazaras had tried to rise against the Pashtuns in the 19th century, but the Pashtuns had quelled them with unspeakable violence. The book said that my people had killed the Hazaras, driven them from their lands, burned their homes, and sold their women. The book said part of the reason Pashtuns had oppressed the Hazaras was that Pashtuns were Sunni Muslims while Hazaras were Shia. The book said a lot of things I didn't know, things my teachers hadn't mentioned, things Baba hadn't mentioned either. It also said some things I did know, like people called Hazaras mice-eating, flat-nosed, load-carrying donkeys. I had heard some of the kids in the neighborhood yell those names to Hassan. The following week, after class, I showed the book to my teacher and pointed to the chapter on the Hazaras. He skimmed through a couple pages, snickered, handed the book back. That's the one thing Shia people do well, he said, picking up his papers, passing themselves as martyrs. He wrinkled his nose when he said the word Shia, like it was some kind of disease. But despite sharing ethnic heritage and family blood, Sanabar joined the neighborhood kids in taunting Ali. I have heard that she made no secret of her disdain for his appearance. This is a husband, she would sneer. I have seen old donkeys better suited to be a husband. In the end, most people suspected the marriage had been an arrangement of sorts between Ali and his uncle Sanabar's father. They said Ali had married his cousin to help restore some honor to his uncle's blemished name, even though Ali, who had been orphaned at the age of 5, had no worldly possessions or inheritance to speak of. Ali never retaliated against any of his tormentors, I suppose partly because he could never catch them with that twisted leg dragging behind him, but mostly because Ali was immune to the insults of his assailants. He had found his joy, his antidote, the moment Sanabar had given birth to Hassan. It had been a simple enough affair. No obstetricians, no anesthesiologists, no fancy monitoring devices, just Sanabar lying on a stained, naked mattress with Ali and a midwife helping her. She hadn't needed much help at all, because even in birth, Hassan was true to his nature. He was incapable of hurting anyone. A few grunts, a couple of pushes, and out came Hassan. Out he came smiling. As confided to a neighbor's servant by a garrulous midwife, who had then in turn told anyone who would listen, Sanabar had taken one glance at the baby in Ali's arms, seen the cleft lip, and barked a bitter laugh. There, she had said. Now you have had your idiot child to do all the smiling for you. She had refused even to hold Hassan, and just 5 days later she was gone. Baba hired the same nursing woman who had fed me to nurse Hassan. Ali told us she was a blue-eyed Hazara woman from Bamiyan, the city of the giant Buddha statues. What a sweet singing voice she had, he used to say to us. What she did sing, Hassan and I always asked, though we already knew. Ali had told us countless of times, if we just wanted to hear Ali sing, he'd clear his throat and begin. On a high mountain I stood, and cried the name of Ali, Lion of God. O Ali, Lion of God, King of men, bring joy to our sorrowful hearts. Then he would remind us that there was a brotherhood between people who had fed from the same breast, a kinship that not even time could break. Hassan and I fed from the same breasts. We took our first steps on the same lawn in the same yard, and under the same roof we spoke our first words. Mine was Baba. His was Amir, my name. Looking back on it now, I think the foundation for what happened in the winter of 1975 and all that followed was already laid in those first words. So that was The Kite Runner. And now I'm going to flip the script a little bit here. Let's see.
Oh, I wonder, Haley, if we could actually break you up a little bit because we have a few readers, and like if I could get back to you.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Oh, that's great. Love the reading.
Thank you.
Okay, if we could actually skip now, fantastic, to Devin. Are you ready, Devin?
Yeah, I can do mine now.
Awesome.
All right. So I'm going to be reading from To Kill a Mockingbird from chapter 10. The reason why I wanted to pick this one is because I feel like we all read it at some point, maybe like in high school or just in general. And I think it's kind of interesting because like you always hear it on the news, or not on the news, but like anywhere saying like that they want to ban it, which I think is kind of insane because it's really like one of the stories that really tell about the opposite, and it tells like how like we should treat people. Atticus, who's like the main character, is actually defending the black man, really wants to defend the guy and tells his kids like this is how they're treated, this is how they should be treated. So to get rid of it, just erasing just parts of history that we really shouldn't get rid of. So I'm going to be reading chapter 10. Atticus was feeble. He was nearly 50 when Jem and I asked him why he was so old. He said he got startled late, which we felt reacted upon his abilities and mainless. He was such an old than the parents of our school contemporaries, and there was nothing Jem or I could say about him when our classmates said, "My father." Jem was a football crazy. Atticus was never too tired to play, keep away. But when Jem wanted to tackle him, Atticus would say, "I'm too old for that, son." Our father didn't do anything. He worked in an office, not in a drugstore. Atticus did not drive a dump truck for the country. He was not the sheriff. He did not farm, work in a garage, or do anything that could possibly arouse the admiration of anyone, besides that he wore glasses. He was nearly blind in his left eye and said left eyes were the tribal curse of the Finches. Whenever he wanted to do something well, he turned his head and looked from the right eye. He did not do anything as his schoolmate's father did. He never went hunting. He did not play poker or fish or drink or smoke. He sat in the living room and read. With these attributes, however, he would not remain unconscious as we wished him to. That year, the school buzzed with talk about him defending Tom Robinson, none of which was complimentary. After my bout with Seal of Jacobs, when I committed myself to a policy of cowardice, words got around that Scout Finch wouldn't fight anymore. Her daddy wouldn't let her. This was not entirely correct. I wouldn't fight publicity for Atticus, but the family was private ground. I wore fight anyone from the third cousin upward. Took a nail. Francis Hancock, for example, knew that. When he gave us our rifles, Atticus wouldn't teach us how to shoot. Uncle Jack instructed us to the rudiments thereof. He said Atticus wasn't interested in guns. Atticus said to Jem one day, "I'd rather you shot in tin cans in the backyard, but I know you go after birds. Shoot the blue jays you want if you can't hit them, but remember, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." That was the only time I ever heard Atticus say it was a sin to do something, and asked Miss Maudie about it. "Your father's right," she said. "Mockingbirds don't do one thing but make music for us to enjoy. They don't eat up people's gardens, don't nest in corn cribs. They don't do one thing but sing their hearts out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." That's where I'm going to end. It's basically saying that these mockingbirds are the black people who are being treating poorly for basically, and they're going to court, and basically it's a kind of book that like really shouldn't be banned, but they're kind of thinking to be banned. So
Thank you so much, and beautiful passage, beautiful passage. And thanks for reading with your friend. Well, well read. if we could have, I think Amy Lynch-Biniak is up next with Fun Home.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm going to be reading a passage from Alison Bechdel's Fun Home, which was written in 2006. It's subtitled A Family Tragic Comic because it is a graphic novel. I'm only going to read a couple of pages because it also involves me describing a little bit of what's in the pictures. I would hold them up, but you really can't make stuff out very well on Zoom. Otherwise, it would be like a kid's reading in the library back in the day, right? I've also had the privilege of seeing the musical that was based on this book. I went with Dr. Kurt Herr in the English department as part of the Totally Hip theater trip a few years ago. If you haven't gone on one of those trips, I highly recommend it. They're awesome. And it was an amazing show that just blew me away and actually led me back to the original on which it was based. Bechdel is also known for the Bechdel test. Google it, it's worth knowing about. And it's interesting that we began with a reading from Oscar Wilde because her book was also banned and still is questioned because of its overt discussion of sexuality. And I'm going to read a passage from much later in her text where she's describing going away to college and where she discovers that she's a lesbian. And we know at this point in the novel that her father is also closeted and hasn't come out to her yet, although she knows all about it. Okay. She says, Dad didn't have much use for small children, but as I got older, he began to sense my potential as an intellectual companion. He says to her, when are you going to read The Catcher in the Rye? Years of neglect had left me weary. I put you in the nursing home, Dad. But then I ended up in his English class. He's the local high school English teacher. A course called Rites of Passage. And I found that I liked the books Dad wanted me to read. There's a picture of her attending his high school English class. And he's asking, who is Mr. Antolini? Peters? Peter says, I don't know. And Allison says, he's Holden's old English teacher? How does Holden feel about him? He likes him. That's why he can ask if he can stay there. And does he turn out to be such a great guy? What happens? Anyone? The class looks bored. She has an arrow pointing to a handsome man, or young man in class, and a descriptive box says, preternaturally handsome football player who was currently helping Dad haul junk out of the basement. Her father asks the class, he makes a pass at Holden. Did any of you twits read this book? She has a descriptive box pointing at her father. Awesome capacity for cognitive dissonance. Sometimes it was as if Dad and I were the only ones in the room. And what about Lizzie and her father? Barner? He asks a classmate. Barner replies, the sensation of intimacy was novel. She replies, they have this neat relationship. They're like friends. I think we were both starved for attention. She shows them driving home from school in the family station wagon, and he says, you're the only one in that class worth teaching. And she says, it's the only class I have worth taking. We grew even closer after I went away to college. Books, the ones assigned for my English class, continued to serve as our currency. And there's a close-up on a letter that her father wrote her when she's at school. It's ironic that I'm paying to send you north to study texts I'm teaching to high school twits. As I Lay Dying is one of the century's greatest. Faulkner is Beach Creek, that's where they live. The Bundrens are the Bechdels. 19th century, perhaps, but definitely kin. How about that dude's ways with words? You know how us country boys think and talk. If you ever, God forbid, get homesick, read Darl's monologue. In a strange room, you must empty yourself for sleep. How often have I lain beneath rain on a strange roof? Darl had been to Paris, you know. The letter ends. At first, I was glad for the help. My freshman English class, mythology and the archetypal experience, confounded me. We see a shot of her English class in college, and the professor asks, do you see how Jake's renewal in Spain actually follows the process of rebirth that Jung calls natural transformation? I didn't understand why we couldn't just read the books without forcing contorted interpretations on them. I was not alone in failing to grasp the symbolic function of the literature. A classmate says, "You mean like Hemingway did that on purpose?" Our teacher frequently grew exasperated with the whole class. The teacher is seen driving a piece of chalk into the board and saying, "Get it? Marlowe's steamer? Penis. The Congo? Vagina." Our papers came back bloodied with red marks, most lavishly withering WW for wrong word. Is? How can is be a wrong word? But like a battered boxer, I kept swinging, buoyed up by my father's energetic coaching from the corner. She's on the payphone. You can Google what that is. She's on a payphone with her father and says, okay, let's talk about The Sun Also Rises, Allison. It's Romana Clef, right? Jake is Hemingway. Cohn was a guy named Harold Loeb. Brett is Lady Duff Twisden. Though now that I think of it, it's unclear whether he was the vicarious teacher or the vicarious student. And there's another 2 panels of him explaining the novels that she's reading in her college class to her, and she barely gets a word in edgewise. "What are you reading next?" "A portrait of the artist as a young man." "Good, you damn well better identify with every page," he says. "Oh, I got my classes for next semester: figure drawing, printmaking, Russian history, French, and intro to philosophy." "No English?" he asks. "I'm never taking another English class again as long as I live." I spent the next year and a half blissfully English free, but the circumstances caused me to recant. Having neglected to plan an independent project for short term, I was forced to select a class from a meager list of offerings, and the panel shows that she circled a class called James Joyce's Ulysses. Could this Hobson's choice have been a form of divine intervention? And it shows her going to ask the professor's permission to enter the class. Was I begging admission to not just any English class, but one devoted to my father's favorite book of all time? Remarkably, this interview with Mr. Avery, the professor, occurred on the same afternoon that I realized in the campus bookstore that I was a lesbian. And it shows her taking a book off the shelf that's called Word Is Out. And indeed, I embarked that day on an odyssey which, consisting as it did in a gradual, episodic, and inevitable convergence with my abstracted father, was very nearly as epic as the original. And I'll stop there. It's a good book.
Well, thanks so much for reading that, and I could imagine the way you described the pages. That was great. It's such a good graphic novel. So if we could have Nicole McClure, Assistant Professor of English, join us for the next reading. You're going to read 1984?
I am.
Fantastic.
So I picked this because I was teaching this this week, and it has, for the first time in a while, and probably at the most chilling time to be teaching such a text. And I sort of apologize because I think Amanda's following me with its sister text, yeah. So anyway, this particular passage is at the end of book 1 in 1984, when the protagonist, Winston Smith, is writing what he is unsure is a manifesto or a rebellion or something that is coming out of him. He's sort of working through his experience with the party, and has some chilling revelations of his own. He wondered, as he had many times wondered before, whether he himself was a lunatic. Perhaps a lunatic was simply a minority of one. At one time, it had been a sign of madness to believe that the earth goes round the sun. Today, to believe that the past is unalterable. He might be alone in holding that belief, and if alone, then a lunatic. But the thought of being a lunatic did not greatly trouble him. The horror was that he might also be wrong. He picked up the children's history book and looked at the portrait of Big Brother, which formed its frontispiece. The hypnotic eyes gazed into his own. It was though some huge force were pressing down upon you, something that penetrated inside your skull, battering against your brain, frightening you out of your beliefs, persuading you almost to deny the evidence of your senses. In the end, the party would announce that 2 and 2 made 5, and you would have to believe it. It was inevitable that they should make that claim sooner or later. The logic of their position demanded it. Not merely the validity of experience, but the very existence of external reality was tacitly denied by their philosophy. The heresy of heresies was common sense. And what was terrifying was not that they would kill you for thinking otherwise, but that they might be right. For after all, how do we know that 2 and 2 make 4, or that the force of gravity works, so that the past is unchangeable? If both the past and the external world exist only in the mind, and if the mind itself is controllable, what then? But no, his courage seemed suddenly to stiffen of its own accord. The face of O'Brien, not called up by any obvious association, had floated into his mind. He knew with ever more certainty than before that O'Brien was on his side. He was writing the diary for O'Brien, to O'Brien. It was like an interminable letter which no one would ever read, but which was addressed to a particular person and took its color from that fact. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. His heart sank as he thought of the enormous power arrayed against him, the ease with which any party intellectual would overthrow him in debate, the subtle arguments which he would not be able to understand, much less answer. And yet he was in the right. They were wrong and he was right. The obvious, the silly, and the true had got to be defended. Truisms are true. Hold on to that. The solid word exists. Its laws do not change. Stones are hard. Water is wet. Objects unsupported fall toward the earth's center. With a feeling that he was speaking to O'Brien and also that he was setting forth an important axiom, he wrote, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. If that is granted, all else follows."
Amazing. Amazing. Oh, sometimes I feel like, I don't know. I've thought about that book recently.
It was maybe the most difficult book I've ever taught. Even though I've taught it before, but teaching it right now in this time, it was an incredible 3 hours.
Well, like you said, we're going to go from heavy to heavy. Amanda Morris, Dr. Amanda Morris is going to join us with The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. Hi, everybody. So, okay, so Handmaid's Tale was published in 1985. It is dystopian feminist fiction. There are a lot of hot button issues that are in this book, which is probably why it's one of the it has appeared on the 100 most frequently challenged books list for the last 30 years. It touches on sex, religion, reproductive rights, feminism, fundamentalism. It offers sharp social criticism that is unfortunately as relevant today as it was when it came out. And it's been banned from schools and libraries all over the US for being, quote, anti-Christian and, quote, sexually lurid. The piece I'm going to read is from the end of chapter 10, and it's the protagonist is sitting looking out a window in the room that she's been basically required to stay in most of the time. And she's remembering a moment with her friend Moira, and she's also having some thoughts as she looks down at the commander that she's been assigned to as a handmaid. Oh, also, The Handmaid's Tale is on Hulu as a series, and it's actually all really good, but the very first season follows the book the most closely. Okay. Moira rummages in my purse. You should throw out some of this junk, she says. I'm giving an under-whore party. A what? I say. There's no point in trying to work. Moira won't allow it. She's like a cat that crawls onto the page when you're trying to read. You know, like Tupperware, only with underwear. Tart stuff. Lace crotches, snap garters, bras that push your tits up. She finds my lighter, lights the cigarette she's extracted from my purse. Want one? Tosses the package with great generosity, considering they're mine. Thanks, Piles, I say sourly. You're crazy. Where'd you get an idea like that? Working my way through college, says Moira. I've got connections. Friends of my mother's. It's big in the suburbs. Once they start getting age spots, they figure they've got to beat the competition. The porno marts and what have you. I'm laughing. She always made me laugh. But here I say, who will come? Who needs it? You're never too young to learn, she says. Come on, it'll be great. We'll all pee in our pants laughing. Is that how we lived then? But we lived as usual. Everyone does, most of the time. Whatever is going on is as usual. Even this is as usual now. We lived as usual by ignoring. Ignoring isn't the same as ignorance. You have to work at it. Nothing changes instantaneously. In a gradually heating bathtub, you'd be boiled to death before you knew it. There were stories in the newspapers, of course. Corpses in ditches or in the woods, bludgeoned to death or mutilated, interfered with, as they used to say. But they were about other women, and the men who did such things were other men. None of them were the men we knew. The newspaper stories were like dreams to us, bad dreams dreamt by others. How awful, we would say. And they were, but they were awful without being believable. They were too melodramatic. They had a dimension that was not the dimension of our lives. We were the people who were not in the papers. We lived in the blank white spaces at the edges of print. It gave us more freedom. We lived in the gaps between the stories. From below, from the driveway, comes the sound of a car being started. It's quiet in this area. There isn't a lot of traffic. You can hear things like that very clearly. Car motors, lawnmowers, the clipping of a hedge, the slam of a door. You could hear a shout clearly, or a shot, if such noises were ever made here. Sometimes there are distant sirens. I go to the window and sit on the window seat, which is too narrow for comfort. There's a hard little cushion on it with a petit point cover, Faith, in big square print, surrounded by a wreath of lilies, a dingy green. This is a cushion once used elsewhere, worn but not enough to throw out. Somehow it's been overlooked. I can spend minutes, tens of minutes, running my eyes over the print. Faith. It's the only thing they've given me to read. If I were caught doing it, would it count? I didn't put the cushion here myself. The motor turns and I lean forward, pulling the white curtain across my face like a veil. It's semi-sheer, I can see through it. If I press my forehead against the glass and look down, I can see the back half of the whirlwind. Nobody is there, but as I watch, I see Nick come around to the back door of the car, open it, stand stiffly beside it. His cap is straight now and his sleeves rolled down and buttoned. I can't see his face because I'm looking down on him. Now the commander is coming out. I glimpse him only for an instant, foreshortened, walking to the car. He doesn't have his hat on, so it's not a formal event he's going to. His hair is gray. Silver, you might call it if you were being kind. I don't feel like being kind. The one before this was bald, so I suppose he's an improvement. If I could spit out the window or throw something, the cushion for instance, I might be able to hit him. Moira and I, with paper bags filled with water. Water bombs, they were called. Leaning out my dorm window, dropping them on the heads of the boys below. It was Moira's idea. What were they trying to do? Climb a ladder for something, for our underwear. That dormitory had once been co-educational. There were still urinals in one of the washrooms on our floor. But by the time I'd got there, they'd put things back the way they were. The commander stoops, gets into the car, disappears, and Nick shuts the door. A moment later, the car moves backward, down the driveway and onto the street, and vanishes behind the hedge. I ought to feel hatred for this man. I know I ought to feel it, but it isn't what I do feel. What I feel is more complicated than that. I don't know what to call it. It isn't love.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I wonder if we could have Haley back for your second reading, if you're ready for that.
Yeah, sure, I'll go ahead. Okay, so as I said a little bit earlier, my second reading is from All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven, and I do have this book with me. So here is the cover. I chose it mostly because it's one of my favorites, and also because its relevancy is that the novel just got turned into a movie this year on Netflix. I did not see the movie yet, but so I will be reading from page 125. It's been challenged, not banned, but it has been challenged based on its pornographic material, and also because it talks about mental illness and suicide. Finch and Violet are the main characters, and they found each other while contemplating suicide. So it's basically a book about their journey and romance. So let me go ahead and start. Afterward, Violet and I stand in front of her house, and because it's her turn to pick the place, she gives me a rough idea of the route and tells me to follow her there. Then she takes off across the lawn and toward her driveway. I didn't bring my bike. Before she can say anything, I hold up my hand like I'm taking an oath. I, Theodore Finch, being of unsound mind, hereby swear to not drive faster than 30 miles per hour through town, 50 on the interstate. If at any time you want me to stop, we stop. I just ask that you give it a chance. It's snowing. She's exaggerating. It's barely even coming down. Not the kind that sticks. Look, we've wandered all we can wander within a reachable bike radius. We can see a lot more if we drive. I mean, the possibilities are pretty much endless. At least sit inside. Humor me. There, and I'll stand way, way over there, nowhere near the car, so you know I can't ambush you and start driving. She is frozen to the sidewalk. You can't keep pushing people to do things they don't want to do. You just barge in and help yourself and say, we're doing this, we're doing that, but you don't listen. You don't think about anyone else other than yourself. Actually, I'm thinking about you holed up in that room of yours or on that stupid orange bike. Must go here, must go there, here, there, back and forth, but nowhere new or outside those 3 or 4 miles. Maybe I like those 3 or 4 miles. I don't think you do. This morning, your parents painted a pretty good picture of the you used to be. The other Violet sounds fun and kind of badass, even if she had horrible taste in music. Now all I see is someone who's too afraid to get back out there. Everyone around you gives you a gentle push now and then, but never hard enough because they don't want to upset poor Violet. You need shoving, not pushing. You need to jump back on that camel. Otherwise, you're going to stay up on that ledge you've made for yourself. Suddenly, she brushes past. She climbs into the car and sits looking all around. Even though I tried to clean up a little, the center console is stuffed with pencil stubs and pieces of paper, cigarette butts, a lighter, guitar picks. There's a blanket in the back and a pillow, and I could tell she's noticed these by the look she gives me. Oh, relax. The plan is not to seduce you. If it was, you'd know it. Seatbelt. She snaps it into place. Now close the door. I stand on the lawn, arms crossed as she pulls the door shut. Then I walk to the driver's side, open the door, and lean in as she's reading the back of a napkin from a place called the Harlem Avenue Lounge. What do you say, Ultraviolet? She takes a breath, lets it out. Okay. I go slow at first, barely 20 miles per hour, as I roll through her neighborhood. We take it block by block. At each stop sign and stoplight, I say, how are we doing over there? Good, just fine. I pull out on National Road and make it up 35. How's this? Great. How about now? Stopping. We go so slow that cars and trucks are speeding past and honking. One guy yells at us out his window and flips us off. It's taking all I have not to slam my foot against the gas pedal, but then I'm used to slowing down so that everyone else can catch up. To distract myself and her, I talk to her like we're on the bell tower ledge. My whole life, I've run either 3 times faster than everyone else or 3 times slower. When I was little, I used to race in circles around the living room over and over until I wore this ring into the carpet. It got so I started following the ring until my dad tore up the rug himself, just ripped it right out with his bare hands. Instead of replacing the carpet, he left the concrete exposed so there was these little patches of glue everywhere with bits of rug stuck to it. So do it. Go fast. Oh no, 40 all the way, baby. But I bring it up to 50. Right about now, I'm feeling pretty damn good because I got Violet into the car and my dad is headed out of town on business, which means no obligatory family dinner tonight. Your parents are awesome, by the way. You lucked out in the parental lottery, Ultraviolet. Thanks. So, boy parade, did you ever get that interview? She gives me a look. Okay, tell me about the accident. I don't expect her to, but she gazes out the window, then starts talking. I don't remember much of it. I remember getting in the car as we were leaving the party. She and Eli had a fight. Eli Cross? They'd been going out for most of last year. She was upset, but she wouldn't let me drive. I was the one who told her to take the A Street Bridge. She goes very, very quiet. I remember the sign that said, Bridge ices before road. I remember sliding and Eleanor saying, I can't hold on. I remember the air as we went through it and Eleanor screaming. After that, everything went black. I woke up 3 hours later in the hospital. Tell me about her. She stares out the window. She was smart, stubborn, moody, funny, mean, and when she lost her temper, sweet, protective of the people she loved. Her favorite color was yellow. She always had my back, even if we fought sometimes. I could tell her anything, because the thing about Eleanor was that she didn't judge. She was my best friend. I've never had one. What's it like? I don't know. I guess you can be yourself, whatever that means. The best and the worst of you. And they love you anyway. You can fight, but when you're mad at them, you know they're not going to stop being your friend. I might need one of those. Listen, I wanted to say I'm sorry about Romer and those guys. The speed limit is 70, but I make myself stay at 60. It's not your fault, and sorry wastes time. You have to live your life like you'll never be sorry. It's easier just to do the right thing from the start so there's nothing to apologize for. Not that I'm one to talk. And I will stop there.
Thank you for being willing to share another reading. That was great. And that was, you said that it's coming out on Netflix as well. Have you seen it yet?
It did come out on Netflix earlier this year. I don't remember when. I did not see it yet just because I'm a little nervous of destroying the image in my head of the book already, but it does have very good reviews, so I'm glad people are able to experience it that way.
Well, thank you. That's always a danger, adaptation. Well, we actually have just one more reader, it looks like, today, unless anyone else had another reading or any other volunteers? No. Okay, and I've been really impressed and interested to hear all of these dangerous ideas. And we're going to conclude with Dr. Robert Kilker, Associate Professor of English, and you're going to read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yes, the opening passage from that book. This book has been banned, not to the scale of some other ones that we've seen, but like, as local school libraries and like that. Canada, I think, for some of its language, but this book is also mostly known for being everything. It's been a book, it's been a movie, a TV series, a radio play, a stage play, a graphic novel, it's been a video game. That I play, one of them where you have to type in, put on, dressing gown, and like Oregon Trail. It's been sort of everything, and this opening bit I love. A friend of mine recommended it when I was like maybe 12, 13 or something, and just one of those life-changing kind of like, in terms of, forming a comedy worldview and just a worldview in some ways too. Douglas Adams is a wonderful writer of sci-fi comedy, he's passed away some years back, but this opening passage is just, it starts off so beautifully. So here's the beginning, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose 8 descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that they still think digital watches are a pretty neat idea. This planet has, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Most of the people living on it were unhappy for pretty much of the time. Many solutions were suggested for this problem, but most of these were largely concerned with the movements of small green pieces of paper, which is odd because on the whole, it was not the small green pieces of paper that were unhappy. And so the problem remained. Lots of the people were mean, and most of them were miserable, even the ones with digital watches. Many were increasingly of the opinion that they'd all made a big mistake in coming down from the trees in the first place, and some suggested that even the trees had been a bad move, and that no one should have ever left the oceans. Then one Thursday, nearly 2,000 years after one man had been nailed to a tree for saying how great it would be to be nice to people for a change, a girl sitting on her own in a small cafe in Rickmansworth, England, suddenly realized what it was that had been going wrong all this time, and she finally knew how the world could be made a good and happy place. This time it was right, it would work, and no one would have to get nailed to anything. Sadly, however, before she could get to a telephone to tell anyone about it, a terribly stupid catastrophe occurred, and the idea was lost forever. This is not her story, but it is the story of that terrible, stupid catastrophe and some of its consequences. It is also the story of a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Not an Earth book, never published on Earth, and until the terrible catastrophe occurred, never seen or even heard of by any Earthman. Nevertheless, a wholly remarkable book. It is perhaps the most remarkable book ever to come out of the great publishing houses of Ursa Minor, of which no Earthman had ever heard either. Not only is it a wholly remarkable book, it is also a highly successful one, more popular than the Celestial Home Care Omnibus, better selling than 50 More Things to Do in Zero Gravity, and more controversial than Ulan Khaloufid's trilogy of philosophical blockbusters, Where God Went Wrong, Some More of God's Greatest Mistakes, and Who Is This God Person Anyway? And in many of the more relaxed civilizations on the outer eastern rim of the galaxy, The Hitchhiker's Guide has already supplanted the great Encyclopedia Galactica as the standard repository of all knowledge and wisdom. For though it has many omissions and contains much that is apocryphal, or at least wildly inaccurate, it scores over the older, more pedestrian work in two important respects. First, it is slightly cheaper. And second, it has the words "Don't Panic" inscribed in large, friendly letters on its cover. But the story of this terrible, stupid Thursday, the story of its extraordinary consequences, and the story of how these consequences are inextricably intertwined with this remarkable book begins very simply. It begins with a house. And so I'm stopping there for today.
Oh my goodness. I think that gave us some perspective.
The galactic variety, yes.
Oh yes, yes. And I think we all need that perspective, so thank you.
Don't panic. That's what I'm taking away.
I know, yeah, that's, I have one of those masks, you know, that has the "Don't Panic" on the front too, and it's a little calming thing whenever I look at it, so too, yeah.
Well, thank you, all of you, for joining us today. Thanks particularly to the Kutztown English Club. Thanks for all of the readers, for the Kutztown faculty and the student readers who joined us today. I think we all did a good job. So pat yourself on the back, and thanks, and this will be then available on YouTube. I'll be uploading it a little bit later today and give you all a link, as well as share it with, you feel free to share it with anybody.
Thanks for organizing it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is great. It's a good way to spend a Sunday.
Thank you, English Club. Bye, everybody.
Bye, have a great Sunday.
Thank you, you too.